Okay. So welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending of your time zone. And welcome to this Tableau Analytic user group. I'm very excited today. We have very good speaker. Sedale will introduce them in 5 minutes. Waiting for that, I will just tell you what makes this Tableau user group a little unique. It's a Tableau user group that is totally dedicated to analytic in Tableau. So we try to have the user group every 6 weeks. For the moment, we have it almost every month. So you see, the average, it's even better. And the objective is really that it becomes a place to be if you want to learn analytic function across all the Tableau platform. That is in Tableau Desktop, Web Edit, or As Data. And we had already like a great session about parameter, about set action, about order of operation, about Tableau function. And we will try to continue to have very good content for you in the next months. And from time to time, the Tableau team will come and join and share the next analytic Tableau feature. So soon we will probably hear from them coming. Here it's a QR code if you want to subscribe to our group. We also have a forum page where we have all the previous webinars. I will copy paste them on the chat, and don't worry, this webinar is being recorded. We will share the recording by email, by social media later. I will also, like I said, copy paste all the information on URL on the chat. So let me introduce the team to you. So the Tableau user group analytic has 2 leaders. We have Sedale, who is a digital intelligence and insight analyst at Purple Strategy, and myself. So let's introduce Sedale. Sedale has a lot of passion in life. One of his passion is obviously Tableau. He's a Tableau desktop specialist, a Tableau feature author, and he's very much involved on the community equity task force. And now he's also co-leading this Tableau user group. He's really passionate about Tableau. He's often also tweeting about sport. And we have a second passion in common that is not only Tableau, but also wine. And you see, French wine, according to the picture. And myself, I'm leading the Tableau Center of Enablement for Swiss Bank. I'm in Switzerland. Like you can see, this Tableau user group is very international because we have Sedale from US and myself from Europe, and our speaker also international today. I love chocolate, I love Tableau. And I have the chance to be a Tableau ambassador for this year. So I think that it's time for me to give you the ground rule for today. So if you have any question to our speaker, please use the Q&A. This Q&A will be monitored, and we'll be able to ask the speaker after this presentation the question you have for them. We cannot monitor the chat, but please use the chat to say hello, to say where you are coming from. And yeah, the only rule here, it's really to enjoy. The session is being recorded. You will receive an email after that, and I will copy paste on the chat everything you need to know. So don't hesitate, obviously, to send some love to our speaker on social media. And now I will let Sedale introduce our awesome speaker for the day.
Cool. Thank you, Annabelle. So thank you everyone for coming. We've got quite a lovely group of people here today. And so as far as our full agenda, we've kind of welcomed you just now. And we've got 2 really interesting talks today. The first will be Small is Beautiful, using small multiples in Tableau with Neil Richards, and then UX tips for better Tableau dashboards with Keith Dykstra. As always, we will have time for Q&A between sessions, and then as the speakers like, we'll also sprinkle in some questions during some of the different events. So if we could introduce our first speaker, think that's in the couple slides. Neil is a Tableau Zen Master, public ambassador, and is also the EMEA BI lead at JLL, where it feels like most of the rock stars from Tableau work. He's been using Tableau for about 5 years, and it was a Tableau ambassador has been one since 2017, and is our first and only, I believe, Boomerang Zen Master. Was a Zen Master in 2018, and is back again as our current year 2020 Tableau Zen Master. So congratulations on that. Neil frequents different blogs and data viz. He shares his methods on design, thought processes, and personal projects on questionsindataviz.com. He's also on the board of Data Visualization Society and Viz for Social Good, which I think he shares in common with Keith. Which we'll hear about a little bit later. So with that, Neil, take it away with your presentation on small multiples.
All right, let me share my screen then. Okay, thank you. Can you see the correct screen?
Yes, perfect.
That's excellent. All right. It's so exciting to see so many of you people here. I couldn't keep up with the chat there, but I just saw something go past about Keith Richards. I don't want to disappoint you. I'm Neil Richards. The guy coming after me is Keith Dykstra. There's no Keith Richards here. He's awesome. Uncle Keith from the Rolling Stones, he's a bit busy, but this is still going to be an amazing day for you, I hope. And thank you so much for your introductions there. I'm going to talk about small multiples. Annabelle asked me to come onto this talk, and I said, well, I don't know what to talk about. And she said, well, why not small multiples? And I thought, yeah, actually, I use small multiples a lot. I didn't realize quite how much I use them and quite how much I love using them until Annabelle asked me that. So it seemed like an ideal opportunity to come and tell you a little bit about when I use them and when, maybe to give you some ideas as well. And so that introduction was awesome, actually. I don't need to run through this again. This is me, and you can see my blog and my Twitter handle there, and do get in touch with me. All right, I'm going to just sort of give a few slides to start with, which I actually probably start most of my talks with, because it kind of underpins my my philosophy for Tableau and some of the design stuff that I like to do. And I guess if this was face to face, I'd be asking, hey, who knows, who recognizes this piece of art? And probably, it looks a bit like data viz. It looks like a tree map. You could probably do that in Tableau, and probably most of you, or well, some of you might go, hey, I know what that is. That's Pete Mondrian. What I like even better about this is the name of this art piece is called Tableau #1. So that's just sort of too good to ignore, really. And what I've always felt about Tableau is that Tableau, it really, if you can draw it, if you can think of it as art, if you want to draw it, whatever you want to do, Tableau can actually do that for you. Look at what Tableau means. This is what it means in English, in dictionary.com, I think this is. It means a picture, a scene, a representation. So it allows you to tell a story with your data, if you like. And then I thought, well, all right, that's what Tableau means in English, but Tableau really is a French word. What does it mean in French? This is kind of, yeah, we've got Annabelle here, and she probably knows a little bit more French than I do, so this is probably a bit risky, but anyway, Google helped me with this. And these are all the different things that it means in French. But Tableau basically means, it means a board, it means a table, a canvas. It's your blank canvas. So if you think about Tableau, it's a blank canvas. Anything that you want to do, anything you want to draw, anything you want to design, Tableau can do it for you. And so I love to sort of introduce with that. And the more I've been thinking about it, and the more I've done more fun stuff with small multiples, it's a fairly recent addition, I think, in one of the 2020 upgrades, where you can actually see, you can put the grid lines on there, graph paper, to help with your view. So Tableau all right, it's a bit like your canvas for an artist, but it's also like your blank graph paper for an engineer, something like that. And that can really help you with the idea of putting things out there in grids or small multiples, or just start with a sheet of graph paper. And a lot of the stuff that I do on screen, I start with graph paper. Sometimes I start with hexagonal graph paper, but either way, that just sort of makes me realize how Tableau is connected with design. So I'm going to talk to you about grid charts today, and I'm also going to talk to you about panel charts. Got a lot to talk about because I'm going to talk about facet charts. You can guess who figured out the morph function on PowerPoint this morning. We're also going to talk about tile maps, trellis charts. I don't know if you've heard of trellis charts. I'm going to talk about hex maps as well. Now that's a lot to get through, but actually these are all different names for the same thing. These are all different names for small multiples. Tile maps and hex maps, similar types of things. I'm sure you've come across them before. To me, they are just small multiples, putting good things out there in different places. All the others are kind of different names for the same kind of thing. So if you're wondering what small multiples are, and if you've dealt with any of those terms, then you'll come across them in the next 3/4 of an hour or so. So as all good talks should do, I thought, well, if I'm going to talk about something, I better get my definition right. So I went to Wikipedia, and this is what it showed me for a small multiple. Not only did it say this was a small multiple, it said, I'm going to put the air quotes here, it said this is a modern example. And all right, it is. This is actually an awful example. So I want to tell you this, and I don't want you to forget it. The reason this is a small multiple because it's breaking down the information. I'm not sure what this is, maybe sales per department, and it's breaking it down across a dimension to show it in 6 different ways. Now that is good. What isn't good is those axes. Those axes are actually different, so it's not showing like for like there. So shame on you, Wikipedia. This is actually a really bad example of a small multiple. Luckily or unluckily for you, I've got about 93 more examples of small multiples, which I don't know, they're better than this. They're mostly mine, so I hope they are. This view by My Bridge at the Horse in Motion. And this is a small multiple. It is showing you the same thing, different across a dimension, which is 12 different discrete points in time. And it's not showing a bar chart, it's not showing a line chart, it's showing a horse. It's still a small multiple. And this was actually pretty groundbreaking in 1878, because I don't know if you've seen art before this. People never really knew what horses looked like when they were running or jumping. You would usually see them, I think, with all four limbs in the air. And that very rarely happened, or they certainly didn't, go out the front and back like that. So this was sort of quite groundbreaking at the time, but it is a really good example of a small multiple. And here's another often quoted one. And the thing I love about this small multiple, this is by Ed Hawkins, who's very famous. He's also done the climate stripes visualizations and some of the climate visualizations you might have seen at the opening ceremony in Rio 2016. And it's difficult to look straight in and see what's happening there, see all the different sort of temperature patterns on the globe. But what you can see how things change across the dimension, across time. And you can see how it sort of goes from gray to reddish to bluish to whatever to boom, red. Those last 3 decades have just heated up, and they're getting hotter and hotter. So it's a really good way of looking at all your data in a disaggregated way, looking across a dimension. And so what really got me into small multiples, probably this visualization, one of my favorite visualizations of all time by Yvette Kovac, who is now a Zen master. She's from Hungary, and her stuff is awesome. You must check it out. Now this was from 2 or 3 years ago. A few mentions of this already. This was for the Viz for Social Good project. So where in this case, we had data on 100 companies, and it was all to do with gender and ethnic representation across the top 100 companies in the US. And our brief was to try and show this in different ways, or to try and sort of highlight what the top 100 companies were doing, or rather were not doing. And I love this, and I love this in 2 ways. One, how small multiples are just sort of so powerful for seeing differences across a dimension like this. But I also thought, that's perfect. If you want to see 100 things, better, more aesthetic way is there of seeing it in a square in front of you, 10 by 10. Now I know all 100 companies, if I want to find them, they're there, but I can see everything I want to see about those 100 companies in the relevant position on the grid. And of course, Yvette did it beautifully. She got all sorts of recognition for this. It's been Visit of the Day, Visit of the Month. It's been on all the different Tableau galleries, and I love this. And I thought, well, I took inspiration from that. My own creation, very different. What wasn't very different was I want to do a small multiple, 10 by 10. That's the perfect thing to do. Now I sorted them in a different way. I came up with how I wanted to show it and the things I wanted to show in a different kind of way. And there's a few pros and cons about what I did, but I was so pleased that I was able to use Yvette's viz to get that light bulb idea of, wow, this is a really good idea for a small multiple. And so what it's doing is disaggregating that data, and I'll probably drum this point home quite a bit, and then it's showing each one by each one next to each other, so you can compare any two companies. So what else can you do with small multiples? Well, strap yourselves in. You can do all sorts. So back to climate stripes again, except this isn't climate stripes. I nicked the climate stripes idea to visualize a Big Mac index, which is just kind of like an economic index for the price of the Big Mac, but it just sort of shows you how prices are changing in different countries. I had a data set, 36 countries. I thought, oh, 36 square number, I know what I'm going to do, a small multiple. So you can take any visualization type, any kind of stylizing, and express it in a small multiple like that. This is one of my favorites, Visual Social Good again, actually, and this was looking at local authorities across the UK or across England and looking at their obesity profiles. I decided to visualize them in, I mean, these are actually just bar charts, but it made to look like kind of obese snowmen like that to keep the different profiles. And what my favorite thing about this chart was it was the best or the most analytical one submitted, but it was, I was sent to on the screens in the sort of the front of the office of the charity, and people were looking over it and they were taking interest in it. It really sort of it stands out. If you can see how many that is, 200 or 300 different visualizations instead of just one, that's one way of disaggregating that data across a dimension, but also really sort of yeah, getting it to stand out. Yet you can have fun. There's probably not many things that I haven't thought of. I decided to visualize the color of skins, of noses, and all that kind of thing, and the Mr. Men. I decided to look at visualizing music in radial ways, but again, if you could find that way that you want to split across dimensions there, I wanted to look at 28 sort of identical sections of Pachelbel's canon, then that was a way of doing that. And you can bend the rules a bit. This one, I wanted to visualize the first 3,515 members of the Data Visualization Society. You sort of coming a bit closer there. Because my triangles were kind of starting to look a little bit like trees in a forest, I thought, wouldn't it be okay if they overlap? Yes, you can. I mean, there's a little bit more skill to doing that, but you can do that. Your small multiples don't have to just be in a perfect grid form like that. You can allow them to almost literally to grow like that. I mean, this is an example. I was visualizing an album and it had 17 songs. Now, 17 is a prime number. There's no way you can make a nice square out of it without one hanging off the end, or however you want to do it. Well, that doesn't matter. In this particular case, what I quite often do is I look to use empty elements of what might be the small multiple on your grid, maybe for the title or for a legend or for some other text that would go in the chart. The chart itself, well, it kind of looks like a sound wave, but it's not really. It's just a whole load of bar charts. You can use tree maps. Why not? I'm just sort of emphasizing the fact that there's nothing that really can't be used as a small multiple. And in this case, this isn't one where I've filtered in each case across the multiple. I've highlighted. So it's actually the same graph, but I've decided to use a highlight in terms of color and thickness rather than just kind of show the line element. But in all these cases, often it's a really good way of just, you're getting rid of the clutter, you're getting rid of the spaghetti, if you like, of, I don't know, let's say you had something which is just a line chart across 50 states. If you've got every layer on top of each other, the analysis is there, but you just can't see it. And a small multiple chart is such a great way of decluttering each of those analytic layers, each of those layers of your dimension, and showing them side by side, whether it's filtered or highlighted like that. And one more I just wanted to show you because I love this chart. Again, it really doesn't matter how many different chart types you have or different analytic elements or whatever. You can layer them on top of each other, but if you want to place them all in a small multiple grid like that, you can really emulate anything that you want. And we're just going a bit meta here, a small multiple of small multiples. This one, I had however many countries that is, and 8 things that I wanted to display. So I thought, well, let's do that in a 3 by 3 small multiple with the country information in the middle. And then in order to put all of the countries onto one page and disaggregate them, you could small multiple those as well. So, you know, you can actually consider it like brackets, parentheses, if you like. You can actually build a small multiple within a small multiple. I suppose technically I could have gone another layer. I could have done it within continents and then country, that kind of thing. Right, this is a small multiple. The difference is this isn't in a square or a grid. It's in the shape of, or it's in the approximate shape of the country France. And this is just a sort of way of demonstrating to me that a tile map and a small multiple are exactly the same thing. If you have a small multiple, perhaps your standard grid or trellis, you're generally filling in all the blocks where you want it to go in a certain order. A tile map, you're pretty much doing the same thing, except you're saying instead of putting them in order to fill up my square, my grid, I want you to put them in as close a position as I can manage as to roughly where they are in the country. So I want Paris to be up in the center at the north. I want Brittany to be up here at the top left, etc. So that I want people to be able to find the information for their département, to find that within the correct place on the map. I just looked at Annabelle to see if I pronounced that right, and she's not cringing or crying, so I must have been quite close. I'll take that.
You say it perfectly, Neil.
Thank you, merci. I should stop there. Right, but you could, I mean, here's an example. I put this one up my shoulder behind me. I had 21 to put in a small, I'll find a square or a rectangle that worked for me. But I found a way of doing it by offsetting all my different elements. So offsetting the different elements of this particular dimension, which were all the 1980s number ones in the UK. So you can do that. They don't have to be a perfectly stacked together grid. And actually, that's what you do if you want to do a hex map. I probably shouldn't show you this because this was, I don't know, this was a labor of love, really. My American county hex map. Getting how many thousand counties together in one hex map is, there are probably lots of reasons why that's quite a tricky thing to do and why that's not that much better than having the individual counties because of the different shapes and sizes of positions. But that aside, in terms of getting a hex map together, and you're probably more likely to see this for the states of the US, again, it's just a matter of getting a tile map and having your different elements of the tiles just sort of offset with each other. And here's a simpler one. This is Japan, one that I devised for Japan, showing bar charts within the hexagons for each of the different prefectures. And I think prefecture is like the equivalent of states or provinces. And what actually, in the next few minutes, I'm going to take you through how I created this particular chart. So almost done. I just wanted to show you what other shapes can sort of tessellate easily into tile maps. So we've said squares and we've said hexagons. There are two more. The first of those is triangles, and this is a triangle tile map I devised of Africa. It's actually quite yeah. Again, it's a small multiple version of a tile map. A little bit meta again. The one thing to be wary of if you wanted to use triangles is every alternate triangle is upside down compared to the one in between it. So that's the only difference. But you can equally well do triangle tile maps. And if anyone knows what the last shape is you can tessellate, it's a cat. No, of course it's not a cat. You can tessellate anything. If you want to tessellate most things, you just need to make them look like a hexagon, or you need to sort of offset them so they look a little bit like hexagons. But I had a little bit of fun there with animal shelter data in the US. And nearly done. I just wanted to show this this is a justification, if you like, that tile maps and small multiples really are the same thing. This is exactly the same data for I can't remember how many, is it 650? Anyway, it's all the different voting constituencies in the United Kingdom and how they voted in 2019. They're exactly the same. The one on the left is in alphabetical order, and the one on the right is in sort of hex map, so as good an approximation as I can to UK geography. Now, the one on the right, it's much easier to sort of see geographical patterns. So you can see that this light yellow Scottish Independence Party is dominant up here, but it's not seen past the border. And you can kind of see the red area in the sort of expanded London and Northwest. And other than that, it's kind of a sea of blue. Over on the left, you can't see that. But over on the left, it's much easier to find your own constituency. If you wanted to find Bolsover, which is mine, you'd never find it on here, but you could find it over there. So they're two different ways with different pros and cons, but they're both tile maps. And in both cases, you are going into Tableau and saying, this is where I want you to put the data for this constituency. This is where I want you to put it for this constituency, etc., etc. And finally, well, that's a small multiple as well. It don't even have to be in any grid form or in any recognizable place if you want. That's just from paintings of Bob Ross, I've just sort of shown them all the different categories by color and every dimension. So every painting that was in the data set, I'm showing in a disaggregated way there. I've just decided to do it not in a grid, not in hexagons or anything like that, but in a much more amorphous position. So that's my last example. Believe it or not, I had to sort of cut probably, well, quite a lot from that as well. I didn't realize how many small multiples I'd done and how much sort of enjoyment I'd got from creating them and from devising them, and then from being able to show these patterns across the elements of a dimension. So in the time left, I just want to take you through some examples of how to do this. I've got some screenshots in Tableau, which I'll try and talk you through. We'll start with square grids, which are they're certainly the easiest example. So I'll take you through an example. So these are the steps that we need to take. So really you need to define your rows and columns. So decide which element of your dimension is going to go in which row and which column. And then we use them as a dimension on your Tableau, on your Tableau sheet. Create your chart as normal within those dimensions, and then you just format it and place it on the dashboard. So the main thing is, I've said, plan your grid before you start. What do you want to go where? So one thing you might want to do, so I told you, I think Data Viz Society had 3,515 members. You can go back to your sort of old school kid maths and figure out how to do factors. And I worked out that that was a rectangle of 95 by 37. You don't have to do that at all. You could have chosen any way of doing that. That was my own choice. But you should decide based on, do I want a long form? Do I want it to sort of fit the screen better? Do I want this to be a square, etc., etc.? Do I want something that exactly fits the numbers of my data so that I don't have any left over? So based on the decision that you want to make, then decide which particular data point you want to put in which row and which column. And there are 4 ways to do this. I thought of, there's probably more, but there's at least 4 ways. First, bring it in your data. So if you've got data, if you've got Excel anyway, this was a very big data set because I was looking at every word in a particular album. And I decided that there were going to be 60 columns. So I've gone all the way through, and my columns go from 0 to 59. And so I knew it was going to start again there. And all I'm doing is copying and pasting and filling down. By this point, I've got to row 14. By the time I got to the end of the album, I was at whatever it was, row 40 or 50. So you can always just manually hard code your rows and columns in the data. So don't worry about feeling that you have to do it within Tableau. If you want to do it in Tableau, and you can manually do it, I mean, that'll be better sorted for smaller grids, partly because of the calculation involved within Tableau, and obviously partly because of the repetition. This is an example. There's just 20 things. You might recognize that they're the short codes for the 20 English Premier League football teams. And I just knew that I wanted to put these in 5 columns and 4 rows. So I've just got 2 separate things. In each case, I probably didn't show it in the last page, but in each case, I always want a variable called col and a variable called row, or something approximating that makes it pretty obvious what it's going to be that I'm going to use for my dimensions within Tableau. Third one, you can calculate within Tableau. This going back, I think, to my trees example from the DVS a few pages ago. I knew that I wanted 37 columns. So I've used 2 things within 2 functions within Tableau. One is int, which will basically divide your number and then lose the remainder. So it'll always round it down to the number below, so the whole number. And then percent means modulus, which is the posh word for the remainder. So if we look at the rows, ID, I mean, you just assume I've got all of them ID, it's just a sequential number from 1 to 3,515. So for the row, all that's doing is it's taking the ID down by 1 and it's dividing by 37. So and then taking it down to the lower whole number. So the first 37 are going to come out as 0. The next 37 is going to go from 1 to 1 point something up to 2. So the next 37 are all going to come into row 1, then row 2, and that's going to increment every 37, which is what we wanted to do. And then the columns are going to go from 0 to 36, depending on what the remainder is, like that. So all you need to know at this point, if you want to use this method, is how many columns you want, and then you can just use the int function for your row and the percent, which is the modulo function for your columns, like that. Now, the fourth way, this is actually the first way that I saw. It might be the first way that many of you see, and it's brilliant, but it's tricky. I would not even be able to start remembering that without Googling it. But this is a way of pulling in your dimension, and without even knowing how many elements are going to be in it, this will find the closest number to try and put it in a square for you, and it'll assign it into rows and column accordingly. So if you want to use that, you can see that in lots of places. That's from Andy Google in the data school. And the reason I don't put it in first is because I like to have control. I like to know where things are going. And I like to be able to just sort of debug or copy and paste and move things around if things aren't quite going where I think. But this, certainly if you want to sort of look into what each of these functions do, you might sort of find out how that's going to work really nicely and really cleverly for you. So here's an example, and I deliberately just wanted to make this example. I went to Sample Superstore and I thought, right, let's do a small multiple, and I'll do it across the, I'll do it across the country stroke region variable. And that, as it turns out, has got 15 different elements. So what I've done, I've got column and row in my data here, which I've added, and I've used the formula that I mentioned here. So I've used this for column and row. And so it's automatically allocated my my dimensions into columns 0, 1, 2, 3 and rows 0, 1, 2, 3. So what you would then do, put column and row as your dimensions, and then your actual chart that you want to put in, you'll put in after that. So measure, in this case, I chose sum of sales, and I wanted just to break that down by category on the columns of furniture, office supplies, technology. Couple of things to point out. I've used column and row as dimensions. They will automatically be created as a green pill for measures, but it's better just to have them as dimensions here so that you can split them out like that. And this triangle, and you'll only get that in the fourth method there, shows that it's a table calculation. And all that means is you've got index in there. I think an index, you need to tell it, what am I counting along? So you need to go in and edit the table calculation and tell it to do its counting of index along country and region, and then this will pop out for you. So it's not bad. You might, at the moment, there's nothing on there to say, well, hang on, what? I know we've broken it down across country and region, but I don't know which one of these refers to each country and region. So we need to do a little bit of work on that. So I've shown you a way of doing that on the next screen. It can always be a bit fiddly to get the labeling in. I've found a way here of getting the labeling in Austria, Belgium, etc. to United Kingdom, and then the 16th one we're not using there. But what I've done, there may be other ways of doing it. I've created a dual axis chart here, and that dual axis chart is this other one here is just a constant of minus 50,000, and I've chosen that so that it goes just down here under 0, and it's something that I can label and then put the country label on and know that it's going to come underneath my chart. So there's things I've had to do. You can see here it means I've had to go and fix the axis. So I've had to go in and say, I know by default you want to stop the axis at 0, but I need you to go down lower than that so that I've got room to put my 50,000 in. And then I've synchronized the axes. And then when I've created the second one here, this sort of imaginary line to attach my label to, I've made that white so that you can't actually see it. So it's a kind of little trick. I find it a bit fiddly. The labeling on small multiples is always quite fiddly, but that's one way to get around it in this particular case, and it's quite a good way, I think. All right, so that's one of my methods. Now, I also promised you a way of showing you how to do non-square grids, and in particular this one in the background here, this Japanese tile map. I'll show you how I was able to do that and get the bar charts positioned inside there as well. So I've started with, this is my, or an excerpt if you like, from the data, which has got the each prefecture, so each region, and the row and the column that I want to put it in. So again, just mention here, tile maps, I think I've said before, the same principle as small multiple, and you just want to put the rows and columns based on, relative latitude and longitude. Now, hex maps, you have to, on alternate rows or columns, you have to move them by 0.5, because you can't sort of, you can imagine a honeycomb, you can't sort of put rows of hexagons on top of each other like that without, you have to offset them so that they sort of sit in the layer below. So that's why, if you look here, whenever I've got an odd numbered column, I've got integers for my row, but whenever I've got an even numbered column, my row has offset by 0.5 like that. And again, you can work all that out if you've got a pre-existing hex map anyway, like you might have for the US or something like that. You can just load it in. If you're working your own out, you can sort of do that on graph paper. So this is fairly similar to what I've put before, but this shows some of the additional steps we're going to need to take. So we define the rows and columns. If it's simple, you can use the rows and columns as measures, but what I want to do is show you how we can use that as the basis for doing more. So the rows and columns this time are going to be a guide for where we want our hexagon to be. And then within that, we're going to use that to place all the individual elements of the bars, etc., around the middle of our hexagon. And in this case, we're going to fake them. So it might look like we want to do bar charts, but we're actually going to draw lines this time. And again, format and place accurately on the dashboard. I didn't go to this in the last example, but in particular, you need to watch your tooltips because you're always going to have these rows and columns and X's and Y's, which you're using as your design tools, but aren't actually going to mean anything to your audience. So just that's the main reason you need to watch that. Okay, so we're going to start by building a grid. I should start by imagining every element is in 100 by 100 square within the row or the column of your grid, because it's easy to sort of make your grids 1, 2, 3, 4, with perhaps just the difference of 1 or half between them. But in order to draw your lines or to decide what else to do in there, you want to sort of scale that up to about 100. So that's the reason I've done that. And I've decided to call this X midpoint and Y midpoint, which is going to be the midpoint of each of my hexagons that I'm going to start building around. The only difference I've done here for Y midpoint is I've said, well, you might want to just try a spacer, because you might, as you go along, think, oh, I need a bit more space than that. I've gone a bit wrong. I need 150. I need 50, whatever. It doesn't matter so long as you're keeping everything in proportion. These numbers are just guides for you, really, to build. All you're trying to do is get everything in proportion and get everything placed beautifully within your hexagons. So that's what I've suggested we'll start with. We'll start with the midpoint. That's going to be your rows and columns times 100. And now we're going to, this is what I want to try and do. I want to put in 5 bars from the 5 different years in my data. And then I want to have them go from 0 to whatever the percentage of poverty is in that particular prefecture. But what I'm going to have to do, the reason we can't just we can't create our bar chart and use our rows and columns as a dimension is because it doesn't know to compact them in like that. It'll just you'll have everything offset. You're going to have to be a bit cleverer than that. So that's what we're going to need to do. And it means we need 2 copies of the data so that we can use the top and the bottom of each line and join them up. So we're going to need to duplicate our data. And you can do that just by copying and pasting your initial data set, having a path key that you might have 0 and 1. Or you can do it also on the data pane of your Tableau, where you can union the data with itself. All right, now I'm going really quickly through this. There's so much to talk to you about it. To do some of these charts can take a while, and so to talk about them along with everything else in just sort of 40 to 45 minutes means I know I'm going to whiz through this. But everything I've done, every single chart that I've shown you today is on my Tableau public profile, and it's downloadable. And I've done sort of blog posts about them as well, so you can always sort of come back and spend a little bit more time if you're interested. So in terms of this, I've said we need to know where do we want our X to start and where do we want our X to end, and then where do we want our Y to start and where do we want our Y to end. All right, so everything is going to be based around this midpoint. This midpoint, we know that's coming from our grid. We put it exactly where we want it and scaled it up by 100. So I've said, well, for 92, I want to go 2 units to the left. I don't know what my units are yet. I'll work that out later. For 97, I want to go 1 to the left. I want 2002 in the middle, and 2011 I want to go 1 to the right, 2012 I want to go 2 to the right. Whenever you see I've done something in purple here, well, I haven't done that in purple. Tableau has made it purple because that's a parameter that I've used. So you can always use a parameter and then just slide it along and think, did I want that wider? Did I want that thinner? I want it taller, shorter, more spaced out, etc. That's the beauty of parameters when you're designing something like this. For X, where the bar is going to end, it's exactly the same because all of our bars are vertical. So the X, which is the value along the axis there, that's going to be, no, sorry, the X, which is the value along your X axis along the bottom, for a bar is going to be the same at the bottom and the top. So I've just copied and pasted that. Now, where do we want our Y to start? I don't know, but lower than the middle so that we've got room to put the stuff in. So again, I've made an adjustment, probably 20 or 30 below the middle, we'll see. And then how far do we want it to go up? We're going to go from the start to, and then a multiple of the poverty rate, which is going to be, going up to 10 or 20 if you multiply by 100. And then again, I put another parameter there. So every parameter I slide will move them up or down or left or right like that until we get the look that we're after. So I've got the same stuff here, just sort of put it a little bit more visually so you can see this is where my Y's are going to start at the bottom, my Y's are going to end at the top here with the bottom plus the proportional amount. And this is where our X are going to start and end to the left and right. And these were the parameters I ended up using. If you wanted to sort of put them in and try them out, you can see that's how it worked. But again, on your dashboard, you would just sort of slide them along, type in different numbers until you get what you want. And then finally, I want to just have lines on my dashboard, which are going to look like these bars. So my X needs to be either the element we decided for the start, if it's one copy of my data, or the element we decided for the end if it's the other copy of my data. Similarly for Y. And then what we'll do, we'll draw a line between path, using path, sorry, between the two values of X and the two values of Y. So that's what that gives me. Not hugely impressive, but I think you can see it's worked exactly how I wanted it to. And I've also just sort of put in colors for the regions as well. So you can see that for all the complications of what I've gone through there, I've tried to make it sound easy, but I know it's not. You're always just doing X versus Y. So it's back to Tableau, being able to draw it. It's thinking of Tableau as your graph paper. If it's not something you can do as a sort of standard chart type or with some dimensions and measures, just try and figure out what's my X, what's my Y, how can I work it out? How can I fake it even from each particular element? And then how can I draw this? And there we've got X and Y. And it just needed us to use columns and rows to then decide the midpoints, the starts and the ends, and then which copy to use. Now, I also wanted to put a big hexagon around it. And so in order to do that, I've done a different sheet, a totally different sheet, just with the column and row. That's all I needed for this. I didn't need to do any fancy X for that. And I've been able to, in each of these, I've been able to use the label to put the prefecture label on. Now this kind of looks a mess because it's too big. But you know, if you've ever been to a dashboard and you've got to get the sizes exactly right on your dashboard, and in doing that, it means when you go back on your sheet, it actually doesn't look like the way you want it to because you've got different proportions, you've got different sizes. So don't worry about that now because I've been to the end, I've got everything the right size, and I've come back to this. But you'll see, I've done that for the colors as well. There probably is, especially in 2021 versions, which I'm not on yet. There probably might be cleverer ways of layering up on one particular sheet, but you can do it on several sheets. And again, I've just used column and row, and I've just used the shape. And then, so I thought, well, I've got 3 sheets. I've just got to make them all start and finish in the identical place. I've got to make them all floating. I've got to have the identical padding on them all, and I've got to make sure that they are all transparent. So by transparent, you have to go in and change the background to none. And if all three of the sheets that I've done are identical, and if I've been into all three and I've fixed the axes so that I know the proportions are the same in my sheet as well, then it just means I can put all three on top of each other, and then you've got what you want on your final dashboard. So that's my main kind of methodology, and although it sort of seems quite contrived, I think it's really fun to do. It's fun to design. It's really satisfying to get your things to match up and to get your things to show exactly where you want them to. And once again, you have in this case, and this was, I think, quite sort of a powerful data set to make you realize that actually, never mind sort of in Japan, if you look at pretty much any of the regions, poverty has increased between 1992 and 2012. And you can also see fairly visually where the poverty is higher than you know, in some of these South Island areas than in some of the North Island areas too. I've just got a couple more slides. A few caveats about hexagons. I'm just doing this because it took me about 3 or 4 hex maps to realize this. Hexagons aren't the same as squares. If you try and draw a square around a hexagon, you don't get a square, you get a rectangle. And you get a rectangle which is 15% bigger from point to point than it is from flat bit to flat bit. I didn't know that. That's why I couldn't for the life of me think, if I had, I don't know, 10 hexagons by 10 hexagons, why am I putting it in a 100 by 100 or 1000 by 1000 window and it's not coming up in the right proportion? That's why. So you need to be aware that they're just over 15% longer from point to point than they are that way. Now you can use them either way. You need to make sure that you use them right way around. I do sometimes see people who make lovely hex maps, but they put the wrong hexagon in there, so they don't tile together, and that kind of defeats the point of the object a little bit. So just watch that. And finally, you don't actually get hexagon tiles and shapes natively with Tableau, but they're easy to find. You can download them and put them in your shapes file. And then, of course, when you only need to use them once, by the time you've done that and reloaded, you always have the hexagons available for you to use the next time. I'm going to go really quickly through this. Sometimes your small multiples are not grids at all. And this is just in for completion, really, which is just to say, instead of using rows and columns, you just have to individually say where you want everything to go. So this is what I did. One I did for Japanese rugby games. I used some kind of flower motif with stalks, and I had to individually put them in to avoid overlapping. And you can see here, this is just one example of the many parameters I had to have. And really, I used this instead of working out the X and Y midpoints, and then sort of did everything from there instead. So that's kind of a niche example, but I just wanted to include it in there as well to say that, you know, they're not always necessarily grids. You can be as what might look as random as you like, just to try and get a different type of small multiple there. So that's it. This is just my sort of summary chart. If you like, small multiples, they're not actually a chart type. They can be any chart you want, just done multiple times. And it's really good for visual comparison across dimensions. Also think of your tile maps and hex maps as small multiples. They have the same advantages and they're done in pretty much the same kind of way. And if you want to do clever things inside your small multiples, then just think of it as the base point of your chart for a grid or a graph, and use your rows and columns as a sort of ratio base point to then sort of figure out X and Y for your further placement like that. And put stuff in layers. That works really nicely. The link there, I gave a talk to VisConnect earlier in the year. I called it Patterns, Polygons, Petals. It was very similar to this. It was a little bit more advanced in as much as I spoke a bit about how to do some fancy geometry for including petals and things like that. So if you're interested and want to see a little bit more, then go to that. Just Google VisConnect. And if you don't find my stuff, you'll find dozens of really great Tableau talks there as well. So definitely recommend that. And that's it from me. I feel like I've got through loads of stuff there. I could talk about small multiples for hours. So the fact that it took me 48 minutes might seem bad, but that's actually quite an achievement. So thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, I can take them, or if we go on to Keith's talk, that's fine too. But yes, thank you all very much.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. This is really awesome. You can see in the chat there is a virtual applause happening at the moment. A couple, maybe I'll take one or two questions here, just for time, so we can get to Keith's lecture. I will say one that happened a couple times was around layout, and particularly with these sorts of charts where you do have kind of, you're trying to confine the space of where different things are. Can you speak to maybe the optimal size for some of these dashboards, or if there are particular layouts that you prioritize, desktop versus phone? I guess, how do you think about the orientation of these charts?
Well, I think a lot depends. If you have an orientation that you need to fit, then you need to consider that first. And sometimes you need to think whether a small multiple is the right kind of thing, particularly for your maps. But otherwise, yeah, if you know it needs to go on a sort of a particular dashboard or a particular area, then you ought to really sort of design your square or your grid size around that. If it doesn't matter, if it's a personal project, you just want to have fun and you just think, right, what would work, then yeah, start with your blank canvas. Do like I did with the trees and make it sort of tall and thin. But other than that, I mean, aesthetically, I love a square layout. If you have squares within squares, it's just easy to put everything into big squares. It's easier to get the layout done, and it's yeah. I think if I have a blank canvas and I know my dimensions are exact square number, that's probably a favorite. But just take things into consideration there.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like you start with a notebook, and I find that to be really helpful, because I'll often start out thinking, oh, this is absolutely going to be long form, and then by the time I'm drawing, it's totally wide and closer to square, just because that's kind of what felt better. And then one last one, and I'm trying to bring as many questions as I can together. I will say, if you have time, there's probably going to be about a dozen questions still in the Q&A once I'm done with these two questions. Sure. If you have time,
I can jump in after these questions. That's fine.
Great. So when it comes to, I guess, continuing with the ideation phase of it, I guess, how do you come up with some of these ideas? Obviously, these are about as out of the box as you can get with Tableau. There's nothing on Show Me for these sorts of deals. How do you kind of come up with these ideas, and then how long does it generally take you to kind of put these things together?
I mean, it's difficult. Sometimes you sort of come up with them by mistake a little bit. I mentioned, for example, that it's great to have parameters just to sort of decide how much space you want, just to sort of make sure that you've got things just right. If I go, for example, the example of the trees one, I slid my parameter way too high by mistake, and I thought, oh, that looks cool. That looks overlapping like a forest. I'm going to pretend I meant that. I'm going to go into talks and say, hey, this is what you can do. But sometimes, you know, you can sort of find them by mistake. But other than that, I mean, I think it depends. I mean, sometimes your data just determines it. Some things, for example, you know, there's 50 states of the US, so you know you can do something that's great in 5x10 or sort of in hex maps. Or sometimes your data will have the top 100 of this, the top 100 of that. So it's sort of kind of easy to do. But often I'll just look and I'll see part of the thing that I'm looking at will be what, you know, how many do I have? What kind of shape can I make with this? That kind of thing. Yeah, it's difficult, but I think no two are exactly the same. But I think it's just a matter of not jumping straight in, but just sort of exploring the data and seeing what comes up when you have a play.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. Thank you so much, Neil. And yeah, lots of other questions. And if you don't mind, also we'll include your Tableau public and then maybe some places to contact you if others have additional questions in our email.
Oh, please do.
Fantastic. All right, let's move over to Keith Dykstra. So really quick, just by way of introduction, Keith leads the East Coast consultants with Interworks, and helping people make sense of data. And I'll say my first time hearing Keith speak was related to his work with Viz for Social Good and some of the UX UI stuff that he had done. So he definitely has a way of helping people make sense of what they're looking at and how they look at it. So I think this will be a great talk for that. A minimalist at heart, he's looking for the simple ways to communicate data. I find the title Spell OL to be hilarious, but that's just me. You can find that was a dashboard that he developed for TC19 that was featured in the gallery. And outside of that, he explores coffee shops, Italian food, and as I mentioned, his work with Viz for Social Good, which he's been doing for some time, at least as long as I've been in the Tableau world. So really excited to have Keith here to show us some of his UX tips for better dashboards.
Thanks, Sedale. Yeah, it's fun to present in a session where Neil is also part of it. Neil was probably one of the first people I followed on Tableau Public when I started learning Tableau. And I love that people like Neil and others share all of their work. It's a great way to learn, just downloading other people's work and trying to reverse engineer it. So I'll make sure that all the stuff that I share is available on my Tableau Public profile as well. So I'm going to be talking you through just a couple of UX tips that I have found myself returning to over and over again. And I think similar to Neil, my stuff won't be quite as mind-blowing as his, but we have ways of treating Tableau like a blank canvas and just trying to explore what can we do with the tool to make these really interesting and engaging user experiences. So I'll talk you through a couple of things that I have found myself going back to a lot recently. Before we do, just a couple of boring things we'll get it out of the way with. You know a little bit about me, but just a little more context. I actually used to be a middle school math teacher, so you can see me in the middle of the screen with some of my former students. And after a couple of years of teaching math in the classroom, I actually started doing analytics for the school district, which is where I learned Tableau. But outside of work, I enjoy cooking. I serve on the board of Viz for Social Good with Neil. And if you notice in the bottom picture in the center, I'm kind of awkwardly hunched over my kitchen counter because, fun fact, I am 6 feet 7 inches tall. So most other photos of me end up looking a little bit more like this, where everyone else is perfectly framed and my head is cut off. So I work for Interworks, and at Interworks, we have a tradition. At the end of every year, we actually collect some Spotify Wrapped data from our staff, and we try to put together an interesting story in Tableau that tells a little bit about some of the music that connected us. We're a global company, but we often find there's common themes in what we look at or what we listen to. So what you're seeing on screen is the dashboard or the visual story that we put together last year about our listening habits. And I didn't put this one together, but I did review it along the way. And one thing that I noticed was we'd created this section that was supposed to, it's a carousel. You're supposed to be able to click through and find a couple of interesting story points about different songs. But if you look closely, you'll notice that the first time you click this button, nothing happens. And you have to click it again to advance to the next piece of the story. And this is not what users expected. When people click this, they often think, is that broken? Sometimes I click it and something happens. Other times I click it and it doesn't. I ran into this in a similar situation where I was putting together a dashboard for a client and we wanted to link to an external resource that had some documentation about the dashboard. And during user testing, one of the users said, well, I clicked that button and nothing happened. And they also said it was really hard to read because if you notice in the bottom, there's a black outline around that resources icon, which indicated to me, oh, they had selected it once, and when they went to select it again, Tableau was just deselecting itself. So I'm curious to know, have you run into that before? If you just want to post in the chat places where you've clicked something and it seems like Tableau is not doing what you expect, but there's actually something very intentional happening there. Generally, it's a pretty common problem that people run into. I see some people nodding heads and some stuff coming in chat. And I will say that what's going on here, there's a reason Tableau is doing what it's doing, and it makes sense in a lot of places, but it just doesn't quite make sense here. Now, here's a place where it does make sense. So this is a dashboard that I put together, and there's some filter actions. You can click on a sector, or you can click on a person, and you can filter the dashboard to show a subset of that data. And what Tableau is doing is it's visually indicating to you, you've selected an individual person, or you've selected a sector, and I'm showing you a subset of the data that's related to that. And so Tableau is visually enforcing that selection until you go back and deselect it. So it makes a lot of sense there. But when you're trying to do something like this in Tableau, which is maybe not quite what Tableau was built for, I'm trying to create a button here that I want to produce an action every time a user clicks it. It doesn't quite make sense here. And there's actually a UX principle that is behind all of this. It's a principle called Jacob's Law. And Jacob's Law says that users spend most of their time on other sites or other dashboards or other apps. And so they expect your site or your app or your dashboard to work like other things do. So when I run into situations like this, where Tableau is doing something that it was built to do, but it just doesn't quite fit, it doesn't quite make sense for the user, I try to find ways to bring Tableau in line with what a more normal user experience would be. And I'm going to walk you through just a few of those things that I tend to do to take Tableau and make it feel a little bit more like what people expect. What you're seeing on the screen here is a dashboard that I put together, and it has these 5 tips showcased in the dashboard. It's available on my Tableau public profile. So I'll quickly walk through some of these steps, but if I lose you at any point, I have a blog write-up, and also the dashboard is available to download. So you can feel free to download and reverse engineer anything. Before I dive in, I just wanted to give a little bit of credit, because most of the good ideas I have are not my ideas. They're ideas I've stolen from other people. I did draw some inspiration from a designer named Giga Tarmashvili. I found this on the Muesli blog, which I think is a great source of inspiration. They share a lot of interesting UX and UI content. Most of the stuff's not created in Tableau, but I often find inspiration from it that I can bring over to Tableau. And then I also drew a couple of ideas from a Tableau developer named Morgan Reeder. Morgan was someone that Interworks actually partnered with for the Oregon Child Integrated Dataset. If you go to their website, there's a couple of dashboards that we put together in collaboration with Morgan. And I just found that Morgan was doing some things that I hadn't thought to do in Tableau. And so I took some of her ideas and built upon them for this presentation as well. So the 5 things that I'll briefly share with you, I'm going to cover KPI placement. I'm going to talk about interactive sidebars, auto deselect hacks, invisible buttons, and what I think is the most efficient way to train new users. But we'll start with KPIs on the side, which is maybe a little bit controversial. If you Google standard Tableau dashboard, most of the time you will find the KPIs aligned across the top. And I think that makes a lot of sense in most places. There's tons of examples, and in places like this, it totally works. If you would have asked me what is the most common place that you put your KPIs, I certainly would have said across the top, until about a year ago when I started experimenting with something else. So here's a dashboard that Tableau actually used to ship with the product. It was one of the sample dashboards you could look at. So this is really old. I'm going to pick on Tableau a little bit here. And I feel like I can do that just because this is such an old dashboard. The product's definitely evolved a lot since this was created. But I was looking for a dashboard last summer just to give a little facelift to or a makeover to, and I spotted this one. And what I noticed when I look at this dashboard, first, my eyes go to that map in the very center. But after that, I'm immediately drawn to these gaps on either side of the map. I have a wider screen. This was set to automatic sizing. And so I found that I wanted to take that white space and use it in a different way. I tend to draw inspiration from the things that I'm interacting with on a daily basis. So HBR is a website that I love to go to and read articles. And I noticed that HBR has a sidebar, and that sidebar has links to other content. So I can quickly get to other areas of the website. It's very common in website layouts to do that. Here's ESPN's website. It has sidebars on the left and on the right side. And so when I'm running into situations where my dashboard feels like it's kind of squished together, if you look at those line charts on the right-hand side, they're really flat and it's hard to see the variance. And generally when I find that things aren't quite fitting with my KPIs along the top, What I try to do is just shift things around. And here's that exact same dashboard. I moved my KPIs to the left and I moved the charts over to the right, and things just seem to fit a bit better here if you're designing for a widescreen. If you're designing for mobile, there's a whole different set of rules, so this doesn't really apply. But I generally have started experimenting with this layout because most of the dashboards that I create are intended to be consumed on widescreens. Now, on its own, this is really just a stylistic preference, just a way of using space, but I think it can be really powerful when we combine it with my second tip, which is making those sidebars interactive. So if we go back to standard website layout, those sidebars often have a way of inviting you to click on something and interact and go to another part of the website. And we can actually do this in Tableau as well. So if you look closely at this GIF, you'll notice that as I'm clicking on my different KPIs along the left-hand side, my charts are changing. So what I set this dashboard up to do was to show different supporting charts based on whatever KPI you're looking at. So you can have that top level number, but you can also dig into a little bit more detail as well. And you can do that for 4 different metrics without ever having to scroll or leave the page. To set this up, you use a pretty classic combination of a parameter and a case statement. So for a lot of you guys, this will probably be something that you've done before. You know the steps. If this is brand new to you, I'll briefly walk through the steps, but we can also link you to a step-by-step guide that has everything that you need to know to set this up. But on the left-hand side, I have a metric parameter. I just chose an integer. There are 4 options, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then on the right-hand side, I have a case statement, which is connected to that metric parameter. It basically says, when that parameter is equal to 1, then show the metric tourism inbound. When it's 2, show tourism outbound. When it's 3, show mobile phone usage. And when the parameter is 4, show internet usage. So this is just drawn from Tableau's World Indicators dataset and allows me to choose 4 different metrics or the user to choose 4 different metrics based on whatever that parameter is set to. Once I have that set up, I just need to add some values to the level of detail for my different KPIs. So you can see on the left-hand side, I've got those first, second, third, and fourth KPIs. And on the right, that 23.1 billion, the card that holds that first KPI, has the value 1, the minimum of 1, on its level of detail. And then similar, the second KPI has minimum 2, third KPI has min 3, and fourth KPI has min 4. Once I've got those values on the level of detail, I can reference them in parameter actions, which is something that came out in version 2019.2. I love using parameter actions, and so I've just set up 4 identical parameter actions here. And all that they say is when a user selects that first KPI, key stat 1, I don't know why I called it key stat 1. I should have just called it KPI 1. But when they select the first KPI, target that metric parameter and change its value to 1. And then similarly, when the user selects the second KPI, target that metric value, but change the value to 2. So if we put it all together, here's what you end up with. As the user is clicking on the third KPI, it changes the metric, the value to 3. Clicking on the fourth KPI changes the parameter value to 4. And so as you're clicking on these different KPIs, Tableau is sending a different value to the parameter. You can see that parameter, the active value is on the top right corner. And as that parameter is changing, it's swapping out the fields that are on my scatter plot and on my line chart. And so it can show a number of different metrics that support my different KPIs. So I love this method because it just allows you to dig deep into these KPIs without ever having to leave the page or scroll. And if you're thinking, well, that's nice, but how often do you have the exact same chart types that support all of your KPIs? You can also do this with sheet swapping. So you can use parameter actions to swap in different chart types. And here I'm showing you that you can show a scatter plot or a global map or a bar chart. All of those things are possible with parameter actions. So I'll pause really quickly just to see if there's any questions that immediately came in. And generally, as you type your questions out, I'll also say, I usually get people asking, well, where can I find more info? I have written a blog article about the method I just showed you and a couple of other things about parameter actions. So if you look at Interworks' website and just search for parameter actions, you'll find a number of articles there with step-by-step details on how to set this up. But any questions that came in so far that we should address?
Yeah, maybe one quick one. There was one in the chat. I tried to scan, but if you do have questions in the chat, please put them in the Q&A, as I may have missed some. But around, I know I find lots of people, especially when they're starting out, have the same challenge, which is the shading whenever you click on something. And this one was, they asked if you could suppress the blue shading. So I'm assuming it was one of those earlier graphs. Is there a way to deal with that?
Yeah, there actually is a way to change it. And it's actually the next tip that I was going to share, which involves some auto deselect hacks. So I think that that's what they're getting at. There's a way to basically tell Tableau to automatically remove its selection. So I'll talk about that in a second. Yeah. Actually,
Yeah, I think this one was a similar one, which was, do you often find issues trying to use parameter actions with hovers?
Oh, yeah, that is a tricky combination. And if you're not careful, it can be really frustrating to users because as soon as they hover, it could change something. So you do want to be careful if you're selecting the action to run on a hover or a select. I also find that menu actions can be a little bit tricky on server. So I would just be careful with those. Sometimes it's hard to click something and then get to that link without that link disappearing. So that's one thing that I would definitely test out. I tend to use select, but it's not always the right selection.
Yeah, cool. I think those are the major ones for right now.
Great. Well, we'll have time for more questions later, but I'll jump into my third tip about auto deselect hacks, which is one way of removing that shading that is kind of annoying sometimes. So I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation this button that works sometimes and doesn't work sometimes. And I'm going to share a tip for how to make it work all of the time. One of the reasons that I think this is worth doing is here's Dieter Rams. He has some great tips on good design. And one thing Dieter said is that good design is unobtrusive. And I think that's a place where it points out why that button is so annoying, because it is kind of obtrusive. You expect something to happen and then it doesn't happen. Andy Kirk, who has quite literally written a book on data visualization, says it another way. He says that good design achieves a certain invisibility. And so I try to strive for that in my dashboards as well. I want people to be immersed in that experience and not to have this jarring moment where they feel like something is broken. And so that leads me to take little things like this, which most people would probably say is not that big of a deal. Just tell people to click twice and it will work. And I try to find if there's a way that I can make it work a little bit more seamlessly. So I'm going to share a tip that will get rid of that double clicking, which it came into play in this template on this drop-down menu that I'd created. If you look closely, you have to click that caret icon twice to make that menu show and disappear. So I wanted to fix that. And it also can work for getting rid of an indication of your selection. So if you look closely at the left-hand side, you'll see there's a border around each of those KPIs. And I actually had a white shading applied to the active selection, and I wanted to remove that border. So this method of auto deselect will get rid of those borders as well. I can't take credit for the solution. I found the original 3-step solution from Luke Stanke, who works for Tessellation, so another data consulting firm. Luke is sharing lots of great tips. So if you're not following him on Twitter or Tableau Public, you definitely should. Luke actually shared a auto deselect tip that he had found from Yuri Fall, who had posted this on the Tableau forum. And Yuri hadn't written a blog about it. So Luke just took Yuri's method and wrote a blog post. But then in working with Morgan on the Oregon Child Dataset project, I discovered we can actually create a 2-step solution. So we can cut one of Luke's steps out of the process. So here's the 2-step solution. If you create a calculated field, I just called it true. It's the true function. And then I created another one, false, for the false function. Once I have those 2 true and false functions, if I add them to the level of detail, wherever I want to implement this auto deselect hack, so I've got those 2 fields on my level of detail, then I can reference them in a filter action. So here what I've set up is when a user selects that first KPI, I want to target that sheet, the KPI sheet, directly. And normally I leave my target filters as all fields. This is a place where you actually have to do selected fields. What you want to do is use true as your source field and use false as your target field. Don't ask me to conceptually explain why this works, but I know that it does work. And what it essentially does is it it forces Tableau to deselect itself. So before we had those borders that showed that I had, selected the KPI, or we had to double click on the dropdown to get it to show. But now if you look closely, you can see as soon as you make a selection, that dropdown disappears. As soon as you select the KPI, those borders disappear, because with that filter action, I'm essentially telling Tableau, as soon as I've selected something, automatically deselect it so that I don't have to click it again to deselect it. So this is my two-step method, but the one difference between the two-step and three-step approach is right here. On the left-hand side, this is what you want to do if you want it to work with two steps. Make sure that you target the sheet directly that you want to deselect. On the right-hand side, Luke and Yuri had targeted the sheet using the checkboxes. So they had targeted the dashboard and selected that individual sheet. It's a very minor difference, but if you take that approach, there is a third step that's required. So save yourself a step by just targeting that sheet directly, like I have on the left-hand side. A fourth tip that is sort of related involves invisible buttons. So here's a dashboard that I was working on for a client, and we created a homepage for them where they could set some primary filters that applied across the whole dashboard. And then along the bottom, we created some buttons for them where they could jump to certain sections of the dashboard. So they could go to a sites dashboard or a studies dashboard or a principal investigator's view. Now, the issue that we ran into is that we wanted to create those buttons as navigation buttons. But if you notice, actually, let me show you this. If you look closely, you'll see there's numbers on each of those sheets. And those numbers are dynamic. Those numbers respond to the filters. So the sites might go down to 32 when you change your filters. So I couldn't use the navigation button because that requires a static image. So I had to set this up as a filter action where clicking on a sheet took me to a different dashboard. The problem is that you can anticipate if you use this filter action, like I have on the right-hand side, you run into that double clicking thing again, where a user selects something and when they come back to the home page, clicking it again just removes their selection. So I wanted to use this auto deselect hack so users never ran into a place where they had to click something twice. For some reason, I messed something up when I had set it up and I thought it wasn't working, and it forced me to find a different solution. So here's the solution that I came up with. I floated a horizontal container across the top of those sheets so that sites, studies, and principal investigators, those are all separate sheets that have that dynamic number on them. And then inside that horizontal container that I floated on top, I did add a navigation button, but when I went to assign the image for the navigation button, I actually made it a blank image. So if you've never made a blank rectangle, you can just go to PowerPoint, you can draw a rectangle and remove the shading and border, and then you have a totally transparent image that you can use for situations like this. So what I ended up doing is floating those invisible images, those blank rectangles on top of the sheets that have the numbers. They act as a navigation button. So when a user clicks them, it takes them directly to the dashboard. But the user sees the sheet that's underneath it because that rectangle is transparent. So they're actually clicking an invisible thing, and they're actually seeing the thing underneath it that has the number of results that are returned by their search. Where this came in handy as well is I noticed that it can be used when you want to eliminate this fuzzy highlighting that happens. The client I was working with on this project was very particular about the way they wanted their dashboard to look. And they said, we don't like the fact that it's hard to read that text when you hover over it. And I was able to use this transparent image again to connect that to an action to remove that highlighting. I think we're a little bit tight on time, so let me just quickly go through my fifth tip and then I'll pause for some questions at the end. The last one will be pretty quick, and I would consider this one of the most efficient ways to train your users. So I've discovered that using show hide containers, this is an old tip. It's not something that is very new, but I've really grown to appreciate this method for training users. The show hide container can allow you to add annotations that users can toggle on and toggle off when they're new to a dashboard. And I'll walk you quickly through the steps for how to do that. The first thing that you'll want to do is just export an image of your dashboard to PowerPoint. I'm not a designer, so I use PowerPoint to create things that I want to bring into Tableau, and I just tend to hack them together there. When you have an image of your dashboard in PowerPoint, Then I usually just add a transparent rectangle on top of it that effectively dims the background, so I can add some things on top of it without competing visually with the instructions. And then I just used a series of text boxes, lines, and shapes to call out the different things I wanted to annotate on the screen. Robert Rouse, who is a former colleague of mine, also has shared a way of using parameters so that you can step through directions. You don't have to show everything at the same time, but users can, click 1, 2, 3, 4 to gradually progress through those instructions. So that's another thing you can layer into this approach. Once you've got your annotation set up, you just want to make sure you delete the background image. You don't want to bring that back into Tableau. You want to lay the transparent image and the instructions on top of your dashboard. And you can do that by just adding a horizontal or vertical container, just float that on top of your dashboard. Because when you've got that layout container, you have the option to add a show hide button as well. And Tableau allows you to customize those images as well. So what I could effectively do is create a question icon that users could click on to get some more instructions about how to use the dashboard. And then as soon as users feel familiar, they feel comfortable with the dashboard, they can just click that X to turn those instructions off. And I think it's a great way to declutter your interface so that you don't have to put these instructions on that people won't need all the time, but you don't have to send them to an external resource to understand how to use the dashboard when they're new to it as well. So that's become one of my favorite ways of onboarding people and getting them familiar with a new dashboard as well. So those are the 5 things that I wanted to share with you. I tend to do some things that are a little bit out of the box, not quite as out of the box as Neil, but I really enjoy just trying to figure out how I can think outside of what I normally do in Tableau and then bring that into dashboards that I create for a pretty traditional business intelligence context. So those are a few things I just wanted to share with you. I will stop talking now to see if there's any questions that are worth answering.
Sorry, I was struggling to get off mute. But thank you, Keith. That was really, really helpful. And as always, lots of thank yous, and people really enjoyed some of the tips that you had here. A couple of questions are actually filing in while I'm speaking, but will the instruction approach work when different users may be viewing on different devices or screen sizes? So, for example, would that work kind of in a mobile environment?
That is a great question. You would have to create a separate set of instructions to fit on a mobile interface. It doesn't scale well because it is a static image. So if you are creating mobile interfaces, you'll want to create a separate overlay for that.
Yep, that makes sense to me. Sorry, now I'm floating between the chat. So yes, it will be recorded. So if you have to run or you miss anything, we'll have that up for you guys. One, I don't know if it's quick for you to get back to the screen where you were setting up the parameter.
Sure.
So and I'm not totally sure she means the parameter or the parameter action, but I would think the parameter when you set up the case statement. What's the best way to get there? And then I guess while we have a second, then how do you set up the action that tags along with it?
Yeah, give me 1 second here. I'll share this again. Yeah, so the parameter that I set up, I used the parameter to set the 4 conditions. I had 4 KPIs, so I needed 4 different options. So the parameter was pretty straightforward, just an integer with 4 values. And then it connects to through a case statement to a calculated field. And that field, the scatterplot X metric, is what I was using to set the X axis. I also had a scatterplot Y metric to set the Y axis on the scatterplot. And those 2 fields on the X and Y axis then can refer to 4 different metrics depending on what the parameter is equal to. So it has a way of me being able to show a couple of different metrics just by clicking through those parameters.
Thank you. And then one more, just because I also think it might be helpful to a lot of people, is do you have particular places you may go? So if you run into a limitation that you see, is there a particular place you may go to find the solution to it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I often find myself when I'm running into something in Tableau that doesn't feel like the greatest user experience, I will go to websites that I really enjoy using or apps. So maybe I'll look at Spotify or, ASOS has tall men's clothing, so I buy all my clothes from them. So I'll go to ASOS and be like, how does ASOS deal with the number of filters that are that people have to navigate? I'll often try to find something that I know I enjoy using and see if I can find tips there that I can bring into Tableau.
Nice. Yeah, it's really interesting that you kind of start outside of Tableau and use that to inspire yourself with it.
Yeah.
I think those were the. Try to just check through the chat as well, but I think those were some of the major questions. I really appreciate the time, and this was really helpful. And I know I'll definitely have to go through the YouTube version to catch up on some of the stuff that I saw that I just found really interesting.
Yeah, thanks to everyone who joined. And again, I have a blog article that walks through all of these steps, and then that template is available on my Tableau public profile as well if you want to download it.
Nice. Yeah, and if you don't mind sharing that as well, we'll send that out to our email. All right, guys. Let me get back to my screen. So we're wrapping up here. We appreciate everybody that was here for the next past couple of hours. One thing, as always, and I'll leave this up for a second for you all to get to your QR readers and your phones. Feel free to, if you are interested in presenting, you can apply here. That it'll also be in our email as well. This is a great way if you are not someone that we've already, tapped for this. I think that this is a great way for you to get out some of the things that you're interested in. I'll also say, feel free to use this if there is someone you would like for us to reach out to. Just let us know that you're putting this person's name here, because we're happy to reach out to people as well to present. The last thing I'll say is, well, a couple of things. One, our next session will be at the end of June. We've already got 2 amazing speakers lined up, and you can actually see who we'll have on the splash page when you RSVP for our next event, which is on June 28th, right here at this same time. This seems to be the time that works for us all. But the other thing, if you guys have in that same site, you can also email us. And you can, tweet. You can obviously find me on Twitter. I think a few of you already have. I'm at Sedale M. But feel free to let us know if there are topics that you're interested in that you like to see us talk about. If there are, as I mentioned, people that you would, love to see on these sessions. As long as it has an analytics bend to it, we're more than open to hearing what you all have and things that you're curious about. I think we may even do like a survey or something, at a later date. But always curious now that we've got a few of these under our belts, if there are any other things you guys are interested in. Other than that, thank you for your time, and we will see you all next month.